If, like me, you've been bored to death at dinner parties by wine snobs who know not a thing about what they're speaking, this video is for you. Together we're going to taste 4 different grape varieties, drink the wine, demystify the whole experience of it. So just remember, as I open a bottle and have a slurp, you open a bottle and have a slurp, and we're going to have a really good time. I couldn't believe my luck when I was offered this job. Go down to the south of France, they said, cook a couple of classic French dishes, and, much more importantly, try some of the world's most exciting wines. Well, that clinched it, so I'm here. I'm in an area which runs from the foot of the Pyrenees along the Mediterranean coast to the Rhone Valley. There are hills, beaches, salt lakes, beautiful old abbeys and castles. There are wonderful people, delicious food, and mile upon mile of vines. This is the Languedoc, the home of the wines we'll be tasting, and one of the world's largest vineyards. 750,000 acres of liquid heaven. So, this is the beginning of our journey. Now, there's one thing I really know about wine, is that I like it a lot. But to add a little gravitas to this program and a bit of proper information, so it's not just fun but quite informative as well, I've invited a chum of mine, Jonathan Pedley, to join us. Now, Jonathan is a master of wine, whatever that is. Jonathan, I always thought a master of wine was an educated alcoholic. What does he really, or what do you really do?
Well, I suppose at the end of this program we'll find that it's actually an ignorant alcoholic, but in fact, to become a master of wine, you have to go through this horrendous exam, which involves tasting up to 36 wines over a 4-day exam with lots of written essays and all this sort of dreadful stuff. And most of the masters of wine end up working in the wine business, buying and selling wine. A few sad cases like me end up mainly doing education work. So that's really what it's all about.
Now, I've done wine tastings with people in my life, and I've blindfolded them, and I put a glass of red wine in front of them and a glass of white wine, and most of my friends cannot tell the difference between a red or a white blindfolded. So it must have been a really exacting test for you. It's
pretty tough, but it's like many things. It's about practice, and I think we'll see that when we do the tastings today, that it's just actually practice and a lot of drinking.
Great. Talking about drinking wine, this is what we're actually here for. Now, at home, I'd like you to know that about every 10 minutes, we're going to taste a new wine. And the first one we're tasting is the Sauvignon Blanc. So, and you can do this at home, take off your top, get your glass ready, and pour. And then it's over to Jonathan, who's going to explain a lot of things to us. And he's going to explain to me right up front why we have a piece of paper on this board.
That's right. Now, I think people think there's some weird mystery about wine tasting. In fact, it's much simpler than you think. You're just using 3 of your senses: your sense of sight, your sense of smell, and your sense of taste. Starting off with the sight, the appearance of the wine, that's what this piece of white paper's for, because you need a background that you can look at the wine and see it clearly. All this stuff about holding it up with candles and stuff all looks very fancy, but it's actually the paper's easier. So if we have a look at this first wine, what we've got is a wine that's clear and bright, and you always want to check that, because if there's something alive and wandering around, you'll know there's something wrong. So it's clear and bright. Second stage is to try and judge the depth of the colour, and you can see on this wine it's fairly pale. For a Sauvignon, for this particular varietal, we'd expect a fairly pale colour. And then the final stage is to have a go at describing that colour. I mean, what would you say? I mean, what sort of...
I'd say it was a very pale lemon, possibly mimosa.
Mimosa?
Mimosa coloured. That's what I'm only a cook and a consumer. You're the governor. You know what it's all about.
Yeah, I'll buy mimosa or lemon colour. I mean, it's that's fine. Okay, so that's the appearance done. So you can put a little tick. That's the first bit of tasting we've survived.
Okay.
Next stage is the smell, and you'll see people when they're smelling wine giving the glass a good swirl like this. So if we do that.
Why do we swirl it like this?
Well, I'm afraid most people in the drinks trade swirl it because they couldn't hold the glass still if they tried. I suppose there's a slightly cynical view of things. In fact, the story is, of course, that by swirling the glass and then smelling, you can see you release much more aroma. So we have a few quick, short sniffs, and rather like on the appearance, the first thing to check is it clean and fresh? And this is our chance to spot if there's anything wrong. smells reasonably okay.
Yes, it does. Does it to you too? It does to me. Clean and fresh.
This is important, as you know, in a restaurant where you're offered a sample of wine, you need to check that the wine's okay. So you check the appearance, check the smell, and then you know you're probably okay.
Now, is that all right? I don't know about you at home, but I always feel a bit embarrassed in restaurants, stubbing out my cigarette and then having a glass of water and sort of sitting to attention when the wine waiter turns up and then sniffing and everything. But is it the right thing to do?
I think it's the right thing to do. I think where people get confused is that they think they've got to sort of offer some wisdom about the wine. I think people get a bit scared about that process. In fact, you're just checking it, it's okay, nothing more, nothing less. So it's much simpler than people think. So we know it's fresh. What sort of intensity of smell would you say for that?
It smells a little bit like oysters to me.
Yes, yes, yes. It is very fresh and crisp.
It's a very, very fresh scent of the sea in it.
Lifted sort of smell.
It's pretty pompous, isn't it?
But I think overall the intensity of the smell is not huge. It's quite a delicate smell, and as you say, you've got that edge to it. So I think we'll put this down as light to moderate intensity of smell. And then the final stage on the smell is to actually do the description. And again, I think people get terribly scared about this. They think that you need some lurid descriptions to describe wine. In fact, the main thing to look for is a combination of fruit, surprise, surprise, the stuff hopefully will have been made out of grapes, perhaps a floral character, which some wines have, and perhaps also an earthy edge. So if we have a snort of this, as you say, you've got your sort of seaweedy edge. There's also hopefully quite a fruity character there, perhaps a touch of lemon or some other citrus fruit. But again, as I say, I would stress, don't get worried by this. It's something that you build up with confidence, is those descriptions. And some wines have...
Jonathan, I've got to stop you here. There's people at home sitting on the edges of their settees at the moment with their glasses poised. They've poured it out. They've heard all these words. They want a slurp, and so do I.
So let's move along rapidly. On to the taste, as you say. Let's have a slurp. Now, this is the bit we're all pretty good at. And again, there are just one or two main things we're looking for. Does the wine contain any sugar? What would you say?
It's dry.
It's dry. This is bone dry. So that's a tick there. We've got a dry wine. Next thing we want to look for is acidity. How sour, how sharp is the wine? That sort of bite to it. And what would you say for that?
Well, there's a slight sharpness to it. It's a bit like one of those sherbet sweets, those lemon sweets with a little bit of sherbet inside.
Yes. So it has quite a zing of acidity.
Yeah.
And on a white wine, and particularly this Sauvignon Barato, you look for that sharpness. That, as you say, it's not unpleasant at all. It gives the wine its nice, crisp, sharp edge. So we'll say fairly high acidity for this. The other thing to go for is the alcohol. And of course, we all know what that tastes like. It gives us the warm sensation as you swallow it. You get a bit of warmth there, don't you?
You do. Yeah.
And this is right in the middle, so we'll say moderate alcohol, 12.5% or so. And then the last thing, which is actually quite important, how long does the flavour stay in the mouth? Does the flavour sort of drop away very quickly, or
no?
Do you get
it's here, isn't it? You've definitely got it.
The length of the flavour is a good sign to quality. Generally, the longer the flavour lingers, assuming it's a pleasant flavour, the better the quality. So we know we've got quite a reasonable wine here because the flavour persists. A simple wine, the flavour will just drop away. So that's really it. It's really, the whole process of tasting is just so you can make an objective, if you like, level-headed judgment of a wine, and then you can blind your friends afterwards by describing the wine in lurid details.
Well, now, as a master of wine, then, if you were doing this in front of one of your classes, how would you have, described this wine?
So, the works then. So, almost sort of reiterating the key things, we would say on the appearance the wine is clear and bright, pale to moderate intensity of colour with this bright sort of lemon. On the smell, it's clean and fresh, light to moderate intensity, and with this nice sort of lemony, even herbaceous.
Herbaceous? I was rather hoping that in this programme we wouldn't sort of have these kind of words like herbaceous and an amusing little wine and things like that.
I'm sorry, Chief.
How can you drink a hedge?
I think many of us have tried, many of us have ended in a hedge, perhaps, not drinking it. Yes, I think herbaceous is a term that's used for the Sauvignon Barato. I think we're grasping for descriptions with wine. It's very difficult, isn't it? Because we need to use other fruits and things like that. So I think the way to say that is perhaps it's a sort of grassy, leafy character, almost a sort of green salad type of character that we try and sort of sum up in herbaceous. That's even worse, isn't it?
In 40 minutes' time, I can imagine people saying, which one was the herbaceous one?
Yes, that's right. Absolutely. So that's a smell. And then on the taste, it's dry, quite high in acid, moderate alcohol, and then, as you say, with a reasonable length of flavour, so we know we've got a fairly decent wine.
Now, While you sit back and enjoy your first bottle, let me tell you why I've brought you here to the south of France. What is remarkable is that only 10 years ago, if you had said to anyone that a wine of quality had come from the Languedoc region, they would never have believed you. For centuries, this area mainly produced vast quantities of vin de Planck, mostly to feed the insatiable thirst of our Gallic cousins. As consumer demand changed, there was no market for the wines here, and the Languedoc was largely responsible for fueling the famous wine lake of Europe. The area had virtually been written off. So, what happened?
The soil of this area, the climate of this area represented a large potential to produce good wines. But at the beginning of the 80s, producers were more involved concerning volume, concerning low quality than concerning high quality. So we had to work with them very seriously to move from a bad concept of large quantity and low quality to a concept of good wines for the consumers.
The problem was that the winemaking methods were entrenched in generations of tradition, and to break this down and introduce new ideas was downright revolutionary.
Well, one hugely important factor here in Languedoc is that because the region's reputation is traditionally one of producing fairly basic wine, they don't have too many strict rules about which grape has to be planted on which particular type of soil. What you find is that in France's classic vineyard areas, very strict rules govern grape and soil, even down to how the vines are pruned. So here in Languedoc, the growers have been able to plant whichever grape they think suits a particular soil, and perhaps most important of all, whichever grape they think there's a market for.
With better grapes to work with, the producers had made a start towards better wine, but the revolution went further.
The change is represented by to produce wines for modern consumers. The consumer wants consistency concerning the wines, wants fruity wines, and consumers who don't want to buy wines to put the wine in the cellar for 1 year or 2 years. You want to drink the wine as soon as possible, and the consumer wants to be pleased with the wine he buys.
In their quest to produce a reliable wine, the winemakers looked not to the famous chateaux of Bordeaux or Burgundy, not even France, but they looked towards the New World techniques in Australia.
In 1990, when we first came here, there were a few fundamental changes already underway. New varieties were starting to be available, varieties like Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc for the whites, Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot for the reds. And what we really brought here was the way of making them into wines which consumers in international markets like the UK and Northern Europe really appreciated. Just capturing the natural fresh fruit flavours of those varieties, and then through investment in technology, modern winemaking facilities, getting it through, capturing those flavours, keeping them and getting them into the bottle.
To the majority of French winemakers, these New World methods were laughable. No one could teach the French how to make wine, but against all odds, those few forward-thinking producers are now making some of the most exciting wines in the world. It's extraordinary that the Languedoc produces 3 times as much wine as Bordeaux and 8 times as much as California. But wherever you go in the world, Chardonnay is the grape that the growers love to grow, the producers love to make wine from, and above all, people, including me, love to drink. So what is so special about the Chardonnay?
The growers, as you've mentioned, love to grow it. It's very adaptable. It seems to work under lots of different conditions. The winemakers love it because they can use all their funny tricks with oak barrels and all this stuff. And you and I love to drink it. It's very soft and round and mellow. Very, very attractive.
Splendid. Well, let's hope you find the same. So finish off your Sauvignon and we'll have a crack at the old Chardonnay, please. Thank you.
All right, here we go.
And make it snappy. I'm thirsty. And don't go on too long about tipping it up and swinging it around, because we've got the gist of all of that.
We've got the gist of all that.
Yeah, we know that. It's sort of
it's a white wine. We're all agreed on this.
Yes.
Now, with the Sauvignon, we looked at, obviously, the technique of tasting wine. So, really, we just do exactly the same process as we did before. If you remember, we had a quick check of the appearance to make sure it's clean and bright. It looks okay. The one thing you might notice on the colour this time is that Chardonnay wines tend to be slightly deeper in colour than Sauvignon wines. That's just a characteristic of the particular grape variety. On the smell, as you know, this is where things start to get more interesting. You've got the very distinct character of Chardonnay, which is this rich, toffee, buttery, almost honeyed character which Chardonnay has.
Do you agree? Are you tasting? You see if you agree with old Jonathan here.
And have a go at some of these fruit characteristics, like sort of perhaps apricot or peach or
Creamy
melon.
fruits, yeah.
Creamy fruits, that's right. Whereas if you remember, the Sauvignon was sharper, more sort of crisp, more zing to the smell. But it's a very round, very mellow smell, less sharp, less aggressive than the Sauvignon we started with. And I think that's part of the reason for the popularity.
It's also a pretty predictable wine, isn't it? I mean,
yes.
A Chardonnay is a Chardonnay is a Chardonnay.
That's right, that's right. And we find that people feel it's reliable, they know what they're getting. I think if you're being very facetious, you can say it's the lager of wine grapes.
I don't think that's facetious, I think that's distasteful. I don't drink lager. Jonathan, really.
So that's the smell. And the taste, obviously, the important bit. It's dry, as for the Sauvignon, but you see it's less acid, it's softer, it's just got moderate alcohol, and this nice broad, mellow flavour. And I think it's that softness of fruit on the smell that we had, and the mellowness on the palate, the roundness, perhaps with just a touch of oak flavour there from the barrels, that makes this wine and makes Chardonnay in general so attractive.
One thing, he's been wittering on all the time about this varietal business. I don't really understand what it means. What exactly does that mean?
It's really just that grape varieties are just like varieties of rose or varieties of apple, that there are thousands of different varieties of grapes. Chardonnay is the example here. We had the Sauvignon before. And each varietal wine obviously has its own distinct character, just like one particular type of apple has its own distinct flavour. Nothing more than that, really.
Ah, right. So how does that, say, compare, or how does that differ from the blended wines?
Well, I think certain traditional areas like Bordeaux or the Côte du Rhône used a blend of lots of different grapes. And the philosophy there is that the wine has the character of the region, if you like, the character of the soil. Whereas with a varietal wine like this, the emphasis is on the grape, that the wine should have primarily the flavour of this particular grape. It's a slightly different emphasis, really. And in fact, this particular wine, the Fortant de France, made by Robert Scally, he was the first person in this part of France, in Languedoc, to use this grape variety concept to market his wines.
So really the advantage of having these bottles just named by their grape variety is that you know wherever you go, anywhere in the world, it's going to be roughly the same kind of wine. So it's a damn good idea, really.
Yes, it's exactly. You've got this common feature, and it makes it much easier to experiment with wine because, as you say, you've got that common element. Of course, the wines will vary. If you've got a Chardonnay from Languedoc, where we are, and you're comparing it with a Chardonnay from, say, New Zealand, there will be differences because of climate and soil, but as you say, there will be a family likeness, if you like.
Okay, well, I think we should finish that one off. Cheers for now. It is jolly good, isn't it? It's excellent. I've been coming to the south of France for over 25 years, and I still love it. One of my favourite towns in the region is Béziers. It's in the heart of the Languedoc and not really a tourist town. Every road here seems to lead you to the massive 14th century Saint-Nazaire Cathedral with its fine sculpture, stained glass and frescoes. Béziers is named the wine capital of the world. In fact, it's quite possible that the first ever vine planted in France was planted here. Oh, and by the way, Béziers is twinned with Stockport. And why not? The architecture's similar and the climate is almost identical. Okay, quick slurp and onwards. Splendid. Right, Wayne, what we're going to do here is cook a classic dish of the Midi. It's called a bourride. It's an ancient dish which originated in Phoenicia, and when the Phoenicians used to come here to deal in spices and silver and gold and diamonds and things like that, this is one of the dishes they brought to the region. Come down here because it's made from a selection of fish. We've got bass, red mullet, monkfish and stuff like that. All of that goes into this wonderful pot into which I've put just some water, some white wine, some fennel, some thyme, some bay leaves, leeks and carrots. And I've already poached my lobster in that, so I have a lovely, lovely fishy flavour. The next thing we do is place these whole fish, which have been gutted, scaled and definned. They go in whole because the bones also help to enrich the fabulous stock. They go into the pot like so. Now what we'll do halfway through, we'll turn those fish over so they poach evenly on both sides. Right, sorry about this, I'm having a little slurp. Okay, smashing slurp. Now, Wayne, I have to turn these all over if you'd like to come and have a look. So they all poach beautifully. Quite gently, otherwise they damage the skin. Right, now we let those simmer away for about 20 minutes. Whilst that's cooking, here's a little tip for those of you who've been foolish enough to forget to bring some ice with you. Merely take a towel or a tea towel, drench it in seawater, wrap it round your bottle and leave it in the sun. When the tea towel is dry, the wine will be cool. There. Right, now I must cut my lobster in half. Just put the knife in at the head end, like that. Splendid fleshed lobster. Now, for those of you not necessarily familiar with lobster, these little bits in the head here just want to be picked out. But otherwise, everything in there is absolutely edible. Okay, so we'll pop that in there like that. Right, now I have to thicken this fish stock with one of the most magnificent products of the Midi, which is called an aioli. We love a lovely, fat, loving close-up of this. These are free-range raw egg yolks, beaten up, whisked up with garlic, crushed garlic and olive oil, and it's absolutely fabulous stuff. It's a garlic mayonnaise. So, into this stock, put some fresh cream and stir that in. And then we whack in all this wonderful aioli. Now, because it's got raw egg yolks in, I've got some more here, it's going to thicken, as it cooks, it's going to thicken this sauce. God, the scents of the garlic coming out of this and the cream and the fish sauce, the fish stock, the lovely juices is absolutely sensational. Now, it's important to be whisking this all the time because you don't want the aioli, the garlic mayonnaise, to separate. Right, just add a little bit of saffron to that and have a slurp on the way, why not? Splendid. But I like the idea of a hint of exoticism. Now, I just pour my sauce over the fish. And of course you get a waiter or your husband to fillet the fish, place it beautifully on a dish and spoon the sauce over it for you. Time to move on. Jonathan's off in search of another wine, and I'm off to join him for the tasting. So finish off that glass. Jonathan, that is an amazing table. They certainly couldn't accuse us of being legless today, could they?
No, with 5 legs. But apparently it's some local chap, Philippe Antoine, who created this, well, I was going to say toe, I think more a monstrosity, actually. But I understand he's fled to America.
Well, I think he must be mad. This is an idyllic spot to create things. It's an idyllic spot to drink things in too, Jonathan. What are we going to sample next?
Are you gasping? Well, yes,
absolutely.
I think well, we've tasted our two whites, our Sauvignon and our Chardonnay. So we're on to our reds. And we've got a drop of Merlot, so I shan't delay proceedings.
Good man.
There you go.
Excellent.
Now, essentially the way we need to taste this is exactly the same as the whites, but just with 1 or 2 variations on a theme. So if you remember, we're starting off by having a look at the appearance.
Right.
And if we have a look at this, you can see it's clear and bright, so we know it probably is okay. The body colour of the wine is quite deep, and surprise, surprise, it's a red, but we can try and push it a stage further and say, well, it's quite a ruby red colour. Now, the one extra thing we need to do on a red is look at the rim of the glass. So tip it up, and you can see on this one, out on the rim there, it's really quite pink in colour. This is giving us some indication of the age of the wine, that red wines, when they're young, like this particular wine, it's quite pink. As a wine gets older, the rim fades more towards almost a sort of brick colour.
Right.
So we know this is fairly youthful. So that's the appearance. Now, stage 2, if you remember, was having a smell of the wine. So if we give the glass a good swirl, have a few snorts.
Is that politically correct, Jonathan?
I'm not sure, actually.
Doesn't really matter, does it?
But I think we're both we're both beyond that, I think. And as usual, we check it smells clean and fresh, no problem. And in terms of the intensity this time, we've got quite a strong smell. Do you get that very sort of fruity character on?
This is like brambles or some kind of dark, soft fruit.
Exactly. We've got quite an intense fruit character there. Obviously, the nice thing is if we can push it a stage further and say what sort of fruit. And as you said, in fact, there's a hint of sort of brambles or plums or something like, dark fruit smells, as opposed to the white wines where we had more sort of citrus character or, sort of white fruit character. Merlot in particular is associated with a very fruity aroma and, as you say, a dark fruit type smell. So the final thing is to finally get round to tasting our wine, thank goodness.
About time, if I may say so.
So if we have a quick slurp. Now, we've got most of the same things that we had on the white wines. It's dry, as we'd expect. You might have noticed that the acidity, which is often quite sharp on a white wine, is quite soft.
It's altogether quite smooth, in fact.
It's softer. Most red wines are less acid than equivalent whites. And we've got a reasonable amount of alcohol. The extra thing to taste for on a red wine is the tannin, which is this substance that's extracted from the skins of the grapes and gives the red wine its dry, earthy sort of flavour.
Tannin also exists in tea, doesn't it?
That's right, that's right. You get it in tea, and as you know, particularly if you stew tea, you get that very harsh taste.
Which this doesn't have.
Well, that's right. This one has very, very little of that character. And that's partly because of the Merlot grape, which is quite low in tannin. All red wines will have some tannin.
This is a very, very drinkable wine, isn't it? But the only thing is I'd prefer to see a larger glass because I feel this is a really good drinking wine. I know all wines are drinking, but I mean gulping even.
Yes.
With a plate of cheese in front of you or something like that. This would be the one for me to really, really swoosh down with it. I don't think it's got much tannin.
No.
I think it's enough to give it some flavour, but it's not predominantly there.
It's not harsh or anything, is it?
No, it's not.
No. And I think the winemaker would be very pleased with that because that's exactly, I think, the sort of wine they're looking for here.
But listen, they're using here the New World techniques. Now, what does that mean? I mean, how does it differ from the, if you like, the Old World techniques?
I think we still all have a sort of romantic image of winemaking taking place in some, well, perhaps in some cellar under a building like these lovely old ones here with lovely romantic old vats, cobwebs, some hairy chap with a stripy t-shirt smelling of garlic. And as you know, the world has moved on, and for any food type product like this, we'd expect the wine to be made in modern conditions.
Of course, of course.
Well, mon brave, I'm afraid this is the face of modern technology in winemaking. Massive stainless steel vats. The capacity of each of these is over 100,000 bottles.
A lot of plonk, isn't it? 1 million bottles of wine.
Just lurking in these vats here, that's right. And you can see they're made out of beautiful stainless steel. Stainless steel can be beautiful, that is. And although that may not be very romantic, the great thing is that it can be cleaned very easily, and hooked up to all of these vats is refrigeration equipment, so the whole process can be controlled, kept sterile, so that what comes out at the end is top quality wine, essentially. But the new process of winemaking goes back to the planting stage. This is a typical modern vineyard. You can see the vines are arranged in beautiful, neat rows, and this allows the vines to be cultivated very easily. They can trim them, spray against disease, and the exposure to the sun's very good. During the summer and into the autumn, they'll be caring for the vines to make sure the fruit's fully ripe when they come to pick the grapes.
Right.
Traditionally, both black and white grapes are harvested during the daytime. However, one recent innovation is top quality white grapes can now be picked at night when it's cool and fresh, and that freshness will get right through into the finished wine. And in fact, the Sauvignon and the Chardonnay in your pack have actually been harvested at night. Only now can the winemaker really go to work. When the grapes arrive at the winery, they're weighed and a sample is taken for analysis. The bunches have their stalks removed and are then crushed to help release the juice. If a white wine is to be made, the crushed white grapes are then pressed gently to release the colourless white juice. The juice is then settled and pumped to the fermentation vats. By contrast, if a red wine is to be made, the crushed black grapes are pumped direct to the fermentation vat, skins and all. Then yeast are added to the vats to start the crucial process of fermentation. During the fermentation, the sugar in the juice is converted into alcohol and carbon dioxide. White wines nowadays are generally fermented at low temperatures to retain maximum fruit flavour, whereas red wines are generally fermented at a higher temperature, the idea here being to extract as much colour and tannin from the skins during the fermentation. Once fermented, the new wine is drained out of the vats and, of course, traditionally is aged in lovely new oak barrels like this. And the wine will rest in here for a period between a few months and a year or so. And, of course, as the wine matures in the oak barrel, it's going to pick up some of the lovely oak flavour, that toasty, buttery character. And also, of course, the maturation will smooth out the edges of the wine, just as a whiskey matures in wood and is smoothed out. A proportion of our Chardonnay that we've tasted already was matured in these oak barrels.
Actually here?
Yes, actually in this cellar we're in at the moment. And the Cabernet Sauvignon, which is coming up to taste later on, was also matured in this cellar. And at the end of the maturation process, the only other key thing that needs to be done in the barrel is to put the wine through this weird process called fining, which is where a substance, in the case of a red wine, egg white of all things, is added to the barrel, and the egg white you can imagine settling down through the wine, picking up any haze or any rough particles from the wine, settling it to the bottom, and so that when the wine is taken out of the barrel, it's much smoother and mellower. Nowadays, to be sure no rogue yeast or bugs get into the bottle, it's normal to filter the wine before bottling. These filters work just like a coffee filter or like the oil filter in a car engine. They're there to remove any unwanted impurities. Now, anyone who finds bottling lines thrilling really probably has some major personality defect. But for those of you who like this sort of thing, the bottling lines here are filling 9,000 bottles an hour, and there's 2 of them functioning 18 hours a day. And as you can see, everything is spotlessly clean to make sure that the wine gets to you and I in perfect condition.
One for you, one for me, one for you, another one for you, one for me, one for you. Now, tell me, Jonathan, in these days of rapidly changing winemaking technology, is the natural cork still top dog?
I think for some wines, natural cork is still preferred, but what we find is that as well as the natural corks like this, we've got plastic corks coming in and, of course, screw-top bottles. And in fact, to be honest, for a wine that's going to be drunk when it's young, plastic cork or screw-top's just as good as the natural cork.
And it's not going to affect the actual taste of our wine in any way?
Not at all. In fact, there is actually a bit of concern about this sort of natural cork at the moment because it can give the wine a taint. You might have heard of this problem about a corked wine.
Yeah, now what is exactly a corked wine? People often, this wine is corked, and I don't think they know what they mean.
And I think they often say that when they see a piece of cork floating around.
Yeah.
It's actually where the cork itself, which is taken from a special oak tree, the cork actually has a taint, and you can imagine as that sits in the neck of the bottle, the taint gets into the wine and gives it a horrible, sort of mouldy, fungal smell.
But surely the tasting is still the most important part. I mean, this is a real human reaction to the thing.
I think tasting is still a very important part of the quality guarantee process and a lot of lab analysis as well. But can you believe it? Someone is actually developing a machine that will take over from our nose and ultimately be used to analyse the wine. So I'm afraid the days of masters of wine like me are fortunately limited.
You're afraid? I'm delighted. So finish your glasses and we'll taste the final wine. And remember, don't drink and drive. Now, Jonathan, never mind. Just adjust the hair, and I will conduct this tasting. As you can see, it is wine, and it is in a bottle. Here is a glass, which is quite good. And let me tell you about this little wine. A quick glance reveals his slightly fruity and passionate little number, which has the added advantage it goes really well with hamburgers.
Ah, Keith, there you are.
Sorry, John. There we are.
I'm a bit late. I've seen you've mastered the technique of opening and pouring the wine.
I think I've done it, you know. It was an avuncular little number with slight rough edges, trimmed down and smooth.
Angular at all, or?
Slightly angular, I felt. A little angular. Anyway, look, you're the boss. You show us what we should be doing here properly. This is a good wine, I know. It's our last one.
This is a Cabernet Sauvignon. Unfortunately, the last of our wines. Very sort of aristocratic number, this one. If we have a look at the appearance, we can see a sort of deep red. Cabernet Sauvignon, you tend to find, gives you very dark colours in wine. And with a pink-purple rim, which, if you remember, tells us it's a very young wine. So, attractive appearance. On the smell, very passionate, I think.
My words are precisely, Jonathan, just before you arrived, actually. I said that, didn't I?
Now you can see this one, again, a lot of fruit, very attractive. This time, though, almost blackcurrant character. And the other thing you might spot on the smell there is, unlike on your shirt...
Where's the horse and cart? Yes.
But if you remember when we were in the barrel cellar, we saw those oak barrels where the wine matures. You actually get some of that toasty, oaky character on this wine on the smell. I don't know if you're getting into these weird smells.
Well, I have to say, and at home, I mean, I hope you're all right, you know what I mean, not a bit squiffy or anything. But when we started off this programme, I was a bit suspicious of the whole thing. But now that we've been going through this for us for several days, or only short, brief, happy 40 minutes for you lots, everything you say now is really coming true to me. I do appreciate this business of looking at colour. I am finding the blackcurrant. I am getting the taste of the oak.
It's a dreadful disease, I'm afraid. Once you're on the rocky road, it's downhill. Anyway, on the taste, dry as usual, perhaps a bit more acidity than the other red we tried. The one thing to watch, I think, on the taste here is that Cabernet Sauvignon tends to give you wines with quite a lot of tannin, that dry, earthy, slightly stalky character on the taste. And again, that comes from the skins, along with that very dark colour. And of course, this makes Cabernet a wine that can be kept for a year or two, and it will go beautifully, as you know, with the food side of things.
Yeah, but hold on, don't screw the tops back on and save it till Christmas, for heaven's sakes. Drink it now.
Drink it now. So that's really the classic sort of Cabernet, the deep colour, blackcurrant, and then this bit of tannin on the palate to give it a chewiness.
Chewy.
Chewy. Solid.
He's at it again. Jonathan, you cannot chew a wine. Food, chewy, chewy, yummy, yummy. Wine, sippy, sippy, swallow, swallow. You can't have a chewy wine.
Well, I shall chew on my Cabernet then.
I do despair. But pray continue.
Not so much a quaffing wine, more of a philosopher's wine, I think, here, you know.
He does
it all the time, isn't it? Eh?
He does it all, a philosopher's wine.
But a really nice one. And as I say, very much Cabernet, deep colour, lots of blackcurrant fruit, and then this tannin. So it's got that structure and that chewiness, and it holds it together well.
Well, it makes it taste more expensive.
Flash, yes.
It's not flash, it's stylish.
Stylish, okay.
Ah, it's first class, there's no doubt. It is splendid, isn't it?
Not a bad one to finish off.
No. And talking of finishing off, I think I will. Now, John, it seems to me that trying to understand French wine labels sends you off on a journey through a wine field, or should I say, a minefield of confusion. Oh, good pun, eh?
No, it is. It's horrendous. I think the labels are often very, very confusing. A few key pointers, though, can, I think, set people on the right track. At the bottom end of the market, we've got the table wine, just Van der Table. This is the basic, sort of cheap and not so cheerful stuff. At the top end, we've got the posh stuff. VDQS, fairly obscure nowadays, and the one people might have heard of is Appellation Contrôlée, the quality wine, often from fancy regions like Bordeaux and Burgundy. Now, the French realized a few years ago there was too much of a gap here. They needed a new category which they could use interesting new grapes with, and could look at areas which were underexploited. In comes our Van der Pey to sit right there.
So that's an honest, reliable wine.
Absolutely, and the beautiful thing about Van der Pey is that they can plant new innovative grapes that aren't traditional to an area, whereas with the quality wines, you're not allowed to do that. You've got to stick with your local grapes. And of course, we're in Languedoc, and their Van der Pey category is the Van der Pey DOC, and that covers the whole of the region here.
So to simplify the whole thing, if we see Van der Pey DOC, we can count on a really drinkable, reliable, and indeed a consistent wine.
Absolutely, and the other thing that's lovely is that we know exactly where it comes from. If it's from Hock, we know it's from this Languedoc region.
What I find remarkable is how in just a few years things have changed so much. Had it not been for the vision, courage and determination of the producers of today, Languedoc would have had a glorious past, but no future. You could say they've created the new world from the old world. To celebrate both the Languedoc and the Cabernet Sauvignon, I've devised a little dish which is terribly typical to this region. It involves the local produce. What is really vibrant around here are the spectacular cherries. So I'm going to cook a dish of rabbit with locally smoked pork, with cherries, and of course with some splendid Cabernet Sauvignon. So without any further ado, as they say on sort of game shows and things like that, I've floured some little bits of rabbit, and they go straight into my olive oil, and we brown those on all sides for a moment or two. These need to sizzle just for a moment so they take a little bit of colour. So we just brown those very, very slightly like that. Then, and we'll add, what is very important, is a little bit. The flaming of the cognac brings out the juices of the meat, so essential for the final sauce of this dish. Then we add a little red wine. And we cook the red wine just for a second or two, just to take off this sort of slight bitter taste that warming wine creates. Right, now, sizzle, sizzle, we transfer that into my pot because that has to simmer for probably 40 to 50 minutes, something like that, on quite a low heat. Wait for the sizzling, in it goes. Excellent. Now, into that we'll pop a couple of bay leaves, a little sprig of thyme, and a little bit of parsley. And we'll just let that cook away to its heart's content. Now, another phase I have to go through here is the giblets. It's the liver of the rabbit, which really, really gives a splendid flavour to the finished dish. Anyway, into the olive oil, we just fry these little rabbit livers, just for a second or two. Now, these are very lightly cooked, succulent little rabbit livers. While those are just getting up frying speed, come and have a look and see how the rabbit is doing. A nice close-up in the pot there. Lovely red sauce developing. Rabbit cooking away nicely. The thyme and the bay leaf. And I have to put a little lid onto that. Now, these livers have been nicely cooked. They're very lightly cooked, and they go on to little pieces of fried bread, which I fried in olive oil, and they garnish the dish a little bit later. You know, one of the silly things I did, I was doing my shopping very carefully this morning. I bought my rabbit, I bought my cherries, I bought everything, and I completely forgot the bread. So what I'm going to do now is get my potatoes on to cook, because that's my vegetable that's going with the dish. And into my potatoes, I'm going to add some little pieces of garlic and some little bits of smoked bacon, which I've partly fried. I'm going to let those simmer and sizzle away with some parsley, while I, if you'll excuse me, pop off and get the bread. Now here's a tip. If you are going to cycle back from the boulangère with a glass of wine, cheers! Make sure you don't spill it. Oh, thanks a lot, Tom. Thanks. We'll let you know. Thanks. Oh, my goodness me. Right, let's have a look at this. My sound man at least has taken care of the spuds, but let's have a look at the rabbit. Oh, that looks grand. That looks absolutely splendid. Right, first thing I must do, take out my little pieces of rabbit, place them in my serving dish. Little bits of rabbit go in there. and the lovely little bits of, a couple of little bits of liver and some thyme. Now, that's the first phase there. Right, now, the pièce de la résistance to my little dish are these wonderful Languedoc cherries which go into my red wine thyme-flavoured sauce. And because they're so fruity and so full of aroma, they only go in there just for a few seconds. In the meantime, pop those into there because that's our vegetable to go with this dish. Okay, now then, my sauce. I'll just spoon over cherries, red wine, Cabernet Sauvignon. Those of you who are really paying attention will notice when you see the final shot of this dish, all these cherries will be facing upwards. And I want you to write into me, care of our P.O. box enclosing, a little gift. Oops, I'm on fire. Don't worry about that. How it was that somehow between seeing it served and seeing it on the end of the television program itself, the cherries had all done little somersaults. But that's the magic of television. Anyway, our little croutons with our liver fried on go on. They add a little wonderful gamey flavour to the whole thing. And that, if you give me a full, fat, loving close-up of that, in my view, is Languedoc on a plate. Salut. Well, that's it, really. But it's been a fabulous trip for me. Not only have I seen the revolution, the modernization of the French wine industry, I've had good wine, good food, and altogether a thoroughly good trip. And if you'd like to enjoy it again, why don't you go down to your wine merchant or local supermarket and look for the Fortant de France 75 centilitre bottles we featured in this little program. Or, alternatively, the same wines, but with the words Vin de Pays d'Oc written on them. I've had a fantastic time, Jonathan. Thanks very much. How's it been for you?
Excellent, and I think the wines have shown well, particularly that Merlot. That was really good fun to drink, fruity and just great.
Smashing. I hope you enjoyed it all as much as we did. Keep drinking sensibly. Don't drink and drive. We're off. Bye. Where can we go next?
Well, I fancy Chile.
That'd be good. Big budget.
Yeah.
And of course there'll be a lot of wine.
Plenty of wine, but what about the food? I mean, do they...
Well, where else could we go apart from Chile? Africa.
Yes, South Africa.
That's a very promising area, isn't it?
And they've got some interesting dishes down in the Cape with Malay influence.
Indeed, they have, yeah. And then we could probably go to Spain. That'd be quite good fun.
Yes,
That's a cheaper one to do, isn't it? So you do an expensive one after that. Go to, say, Australia.
That's right. And then perhaps England.
England? Oh, that's a cheap one. No,
I'm sure the director will love that.
He would. Yes. The possibilities are absolutely endless, aren't they?